Today we're going to take a look at pivot tables and how to use those. I know they can be a little tricky, but we can simplify it down, and when we understand what the filters do and the different ways to create the pivot table, it makes it a lot easier. And so there's 4 categories when you create your pivot table that you can put your values into, and one of them is a filter. It is a similar concept to this filter up here. You click that button, gives you the drop downs. Columns, when you put it there, every time you put a value in there, it'll create a column, just like in normal Excel. Rows, it's the same idea. It'll create different rows that you can use. And then values, this is normally numerical data, and this will help you summarize it. You can also do different types of functions in there, like averaging and subtracting, and then there's a refresh button, which we'll take a look at in our example. So this is just a simple example of a zoo with different types of animals, what type of animal they are, where they were from, the number of them, and who keeps care of them. So if we wanted to create a pivot table from this, we can select all of our data here. It's best to not leave any spaces in between, or you'll get a blank in your pivot table. And you want to make sure that there's headers up above. If you don't have the headers, it would be lions, big cat, Africa as the headers. It'll take your top row. And we can click Insert. And we can go to Pivot Table. And this little dialog box shows up. And normally what I like to do is use an existing worksheet. If you do a new worksheet, it'll create one down below with its pivot table. So I'll do existing, and then I'm going to choose where to put it. You can click on it there, and I'll click OK. That will create our pivot table. And so these filters, columns, rows, values, that's what we were looking at earlier. So let's test this. If I wanted to see how many animals are from each place, I could do numbers. Put it in values, it'll auto select where to best put it, and then I can do where. And so it quickly creates this data table. Africa, so we'll take a look at that. That was intentional. Africa, Australia, Narnia, that's where the unicorn comes from, and it quickly summarizes that. But notice how Africa is spelled differently, and that happens down here. So if I were to change this, it doesn't auto change it in the pivot table. And so that refresh button will update the number within this selected area. So if I right click on it, I can do the refresh button somewhere on here. There it is, refresh here. And then it will change that Africa to something else. Well, change it to Africa and fix that typo. And if we wanted to look at another thing, let's see, we want to know who the zookeeper is for all of the different types of animals. We can do it there, and we have both of them in rows. Depending on how you want to do it, values will make it so one zookeeper per each animal. Columns, it'll put all the zookeepers here, but there's no numbers. We could add those, and you get this table here. So with the values, that's where we start to get value to a pivot table. And then, so that's one way to do it. We could also throw it over here so we can filter. I just want to see all of the animals from David Attenborough. And these are all the ones he controls. That's using the filter function, puts it up here. We can see who Morgan Freeman looks at. He has bluegills, that kind of stuff. And then sometimes the data in here it's nice to get it outside of the pivot table once we got it. So what we can do is we can go into it, Control C, Control V, and we just took it out of the pivot table. It won't have any special functions on it, but now we can use this information how we want to, whereas when it's in the pivot table, you're always going to get this pivot table field showing up. So those are just a couple quick tips on how to use a pivot table. Understanding what filters, columns, rows, and values do helps the process of making an effective pivot table. And it would be great if you would subscribe down below and like the video. If you have any comments, that would be great. I can start to answer those comments and help as best as I can. Thank you. Bye.